When I was younger, my family always hosted Christmas gatherings. At the time, we lived on the upper level of a two-family house that my parents owned, renting out the lower floor to various tenants over the years. During Christmas 2012, a new tenant had just moved in downstairs. He was a quiet 30-something man, which seemed perfect for my parents since they were looking for someone low-key. However, only a few days after he moved in, we started noticing strange noises late at night. The front door would open and shut repeatedly. There was loud talking, and sometimes even yelling. This prompted my dad to go downstairs one night to confront him and ask him to keep it down. That moment marked the beginning of my dad's unease about this tenant. Fast forward to Christmas Eve, our house was bustling with family. The dining room table was extended to fit all 20 of our relatives, and every seat was filled. My Uncle Jake, who is a heavy smoker, stepped outside several times during the night for a cigarette. After our main course, Uncle Jake went out again, leaving his flip phone on the table. When it started ringing a few times after he had stepped out, my dad told me to bring it to him. I grabbed the phone and ran down the stairs to deliver it. When I got to the front hallway, I noticed something odd. The back door was open. Our house's front hall had 3 doors, one leading to the downstairs apartment, the front door, and another hallway that led to the back door. Assuming Uncle Jake had gone out back to smoke, I headed outside, but he wasn't there. Then, I heard movement in the shed. The shed door was slightly ajar, so I called out for Uncle Jake, thinking he might be inside. A figure emerged from the shed. It was too dark to see clearly, but I initially thought it was my uncle. The figure began walking toward me quickly. At first, I assumed it was because he was in a rush to answer his phone, but as the person got closer, the lights from the house revealed his face. It wasn't Uncle Jake, it was our downstairs tenant. There was something about the way he was approaching me that felt menacing, so I turned and ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me. Shaken, I went to the front yard, where I finally found Uncle Jake smoking. I told him about what had happened and how the tenant had seemingly charged at me from the shed. But Uncle Jake, not being the confrontational type, didn't seem too concerned. I stayed with him until he finished his cigarette, feeling too uneasy to leave him alone. We walked back upstairs together, and I told my dad what had happened. The atmosphere at the dinner table grew tense. My dad was visibly concerned, but not wanting to ruin the rest of our Christmas dinner, he waited until everyone had finished eating before going outside to check. When he returned, he said the tenant wouldn't answer his door, but the shed was now closed. As the evening wound down and the last of our family left, we all started getting ready for bed. I decided to stay up a bit longer in the living room, enjoying the soft glow of the fire and the Christmas tree lights. I put on a Christmas movie and eventually dozed off on the couch. At some point, I woke up suddenly, half asleep, to the sound of a creak on the stairs. Too tired to move, I figured it was just my mom, dad, or sister. The carpeted floors upstairs muffled footsteps, but I heard a door open down the hall, which I assumed was my sister going to bed. The fire was almost out, and the movie had ended. The clock under the TV read 1 a.m. I decided to stay on the couch since I was comfortable. A few minutes later, I heard a rustling noise near the tree, like an ornament falling. Someone had walked into it. I turned onto my side to look, but the tree stood perfectly still. Thinking I might have imagined it, I flipped to my other side to relax. That's when I saw him. Standing over me, slightly bent down, was a man. My first instinct was to scream, and my second was to analyze his face. In those moments, I realized it wasn't my dad or anyone from my family. It was the tenant from downstairs. Panic set in, and I screamed even louder. He tried to cover my mouth, but the noise was enough to wake everyone in the house. Realizing he was caught, the man bolted for the stairs just as my dad came storming out of his room. My dad chased after him, but by the time he got to the door, the tenant was already driving away down the street. We later concluded that the man had been standing over me to ensure I was asleep before attempting to rob us. Luckily, my parents had copies of his ID and other important information from the rental agreement. They used this to track him down and successfully sued him for breaking and entering. We won the case without much difficulty, but the experience left a lasting impact on all of us. It was one of the most terrifying events I've ever lived through, and it could have ended much worse. On Christmas Eve of 2015, I was just starting a new job as a psychiatric nurse. Since I was new, I had to take the overnight shifts, and that included working through Christmas Eve into the early hours of Christmas morning, which was a Friday. The job was generally slow during those hours. Most patients were asleep, leaving me with a lot of time to sit at my desk and monitor the building or work on a computer. Occasionally, I had to check on patients, observe their behavior, or handle situations when a patient became restless in the middle of the night. Adjusting to this role, with its challenges of dealing with numerous people with varying mental disabilities, was overwhelming at first. However, the festive touch of Christmas decorations scattered throughout the facility brought a sense of warmth and cheer to an otherwise somber environment. At night, the main hallway lights were dimmed, and a softer, more subdued lighting took their place. Combined with the glow of Christmas lights, it created a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. There was one patient, though, who consistently gave me the creeps. Her name was Abitha, an elderly, frail woman suffering from severe schizophrenia. Her behavior was unpredictable. She would often mutter incoherently to herself and occasionally blurt out words or phrases that seemed directed at me, though she was likely talking to no one in particular. That night, around 3 a.m., I went to check on her. She was still awake, which wasn't unusual for her. When I asked if she needed anything, she just looked at me, gave me the most unsettling smile, and then began to laugh. The sound was chilling, as if it were something out of a horror movie. She turned away from me and began muttering under her breath. Most of what she said was incomprehensible, but I distinctly heard her say, "Check the bathroom." Her tone made my skin crawl. I asked her to repeat herself, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned onto her side and rested her head on the pillow. Thinking perhaps she wanted me to check the bathroom in her room, I obliged. I looked around but found nothing unusual. Shrugging it off, I left her room and returned to my desk in the hallway. Yet, her words lingered in my mind. From my desk, I could see the door to the larger, shared bathroom across the hall. Curiosity gnawed at me, and despite my better judgment, I decided to check it out. When I stepped inside, I was greeted with darkness. The lights wouldn't turn on. I stood in the doorway, hesitating, and then I heard it, breathing. My heart began to race. A faint clicking noise came from one of the stalls. Alarmed, I quickly left the bathroom to grab a doorstop from the desk. I wedged it under the door so the light from the hallway could partially illuminate the room. Kneeling cautiously at the doorway, I peered under the stalls from a safe distance. Both appeared empty. There were no feet visible. However, one stall door was shut. Steeling myself, I crept closer and pressed my eye to the narrow crack of the closed stall door. It was too dark to make out anything clearly, but I thought I could see a vague shape at the back of the stall. My nerves on edge, I got back down to look under the stall again, but this time I saw nothing at all. Still unnerved, I decided to take one more look through the crack. As I leaned in, my blood ran cold. A face was staring right back at me, inches from the crack. Whoever it was had pressed their face against the door, peeking out just as I had been peeking in. I stumbled back, terrified, but managed to gather myself enough to slam the bathroom door shut. My hands shaking, I grabbed the key from my desk and locked the door. I immediately alerted another nurse, explaining what I'd just encountered. Together, we unlocked the bathroom and went inside. This time, the lights worked, and the bathroom was completely empty. Both stall doors were wide open. There was no sign of anyone. It was impossible for someone to have escaped the room, much less locked the door after leaving. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the unease. Before my shift ended, I tried asking Abitha if she knew anything about what I had seen or heard, but she refused to respond. As I was leaving, I grabbed my jacket and began walking toward the door. Just then, I heard her voice behind me say, "Merry Christmas." When I turned, she was smiling at me, but it wasn't a warm or cheerful smile. It was unsettling, almost sinister. I had to leave. Over the following weeks, I worked with Abatha a few more times before she was eventually transferred to another facility for hospice care. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that there was some kind of connection between her and whatever I experienced in that bathroom. It's one of those events I'll never be able to explain or rationalize, and it still haunts me. Last year, I wanted to make Christmas extra special for my girlfriend Tristan by trying something new. It was our first Christmas in the apartment we had just moved into together, a place we still live in today. Neither of us had ever cut down our own Christmas tree before, so I thought it would be a fun and memorable experience. Living in New Hampshire, where spruce trees are abundant, I figured we were in the perfect place to make it happen. One snowy evening, I suggested we take a short trip to a nearby forest known for its spruce trees. I intentionally chose a time when it was snowing because I thought it would make the adventure feel even more festive and Christmassy. After a bit of driving, I pulled my pickup truck into what looked like a small clearing off the side of the road. It was hard to tell with all the snow covering the ground, but I could hear the crunch of gravel beneath the tires, so I figured it was a safe spot to leave the truck. The forest was in a hilly area, which meant we had a lot of uphill trekking to do. As we trudged through the snow, Tristan began to complain about the cold and the effort it took. She wasn't as enthusiastic about the adventure as I had hoped, but I encouraged her to keep going. We were on the hunt for the perfect tree, something small enough to fit in our living room, but big enough to make a statement. Most of the trees we came across were far too large. Finally, after what felt like ages of searching, we found it. The perfect tree. I gave the tree a quick shake to admire it before raising the axe I'd brought along. The trunk wasn't very thick, so after a few good swings, the tree toppled over with a satisfying thud. I was thrilled, but we now had the challenge of carrying it back down the hill. Dragging it through the snow didn't seem like a great option, so I asked Tristan to grab the top end of the tree while I carried the trunk. That's when she realized she hadn't brought gloves. Fortunately, there was an extra pair in the truck. I handed her the keys and told her to hurry back and grab them while I waited. Tristan ran off and I stayed behind with the tree. As I sat on the trunk, I took a moment to soak in the atmosphere. The forest stretched out endlessly in every direction, a sea of pine trees dusted with snow. The world around me was quiet, save for the gentle sound of wind and the soft patter of snowflakes. Dusk had already settled in, and the light was fading fast. I turned on my flashlight to help Tristan find her way back to me when she returned. The silence of the woods was unsettling after a while. It was so still that every little sound felt magnified. Eventually, I heard the crunching of footsteps on the snow. Assuming it was Tristan, I called out her name and waved the flashlight in the direction of the sound. But the footsteps stopped, and no one answered. Thinking she was trying to play a prank on me, I decided to turn the tables. I left the flashlight on the stump of the tree and quietly crept into the shadows of the forest, hiding behind a large pine tree. I crouched there, waiting for her to step into the beam of light. Moments later, someone came running into view, but it wasn't Tristan. A man in a hooded coat charged straight for the flashlight, grabbed it, and turned it off. My stomach dropped as darkness enveloped the forest. From the way he had rushed up to the light, it was clear he wasn't there with good intentions. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted down the hill toward the truck. The noise of my frantic footsteps must have given away my position, but I didn't dare look back. About halfway down the hill, I heard Tristan's panicked screams calling my name. Her voice was laced with terror, and it pushed me to run even faster. As I neared the truck, I could hear the blaring sound of the horn honking repeatedly. I finally reached the clearing, threw open the driver's side door, and jumped in. Tristan was already inside, yelling at me to drive. I didn't need any more convincing. I floored the gas pedal, and the truck roared to life as we sped out of the clearing. As we glanced back, we saw him. The man was standing right where my truck had been parked just moments before, watching us drive away. His presence sent chills down my spine. We didn't stop until we were far from that forest. Eventually, we pulled into a Home Depot parking lot and decided to buy a tree there instead. It wasn't the magical experience I'd envisioned, but it was safe. Looking back, I can say with certainty that we'll never attempt to cut down our own Christmas tree again. Some traditions just aren't worth the risk.